guys, Howard here today with a bit of music education, okay? No, please, Howard, not that, please, anything but that. No, learning songs and learning solos is great. Obviously, I teach a lot of that on my channel. But in between all that, it's really cool to learn a bit about music and how it applies to your instrument, to your guitar, okay? Learning music theory in and of itself is learning music theory in and of itself. But learning it and applying it to your instrument is one of the coolest things in the world. So I thought I'd do this today, and a little shout out here to Harold, by the way. Harold, if you're out there. So I'm going to be in the key of G major for this. It doesn't matter what key you choose, by the way. The information that I'm going to share with you stays the same, whether it's C major, D major, A major. The basic concept here remains the same no matter what the key. So I'm going to be in the key of G major. And that's just a simple G major scale in one octave because that's all we need to concern ourselves with right now. The notes in the scale are G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, and then it all starts over again. G, A, B, C. Okay? Now, for each note that's in the scale, there's a corresponding chord. And the chord will either be a major or a minor, okay? Now, there's a simple reason for that. It's because if you want to have 7 chords, 7 notes and 7 chords that all harmonize with each other, then they want to be built from the same scale. A scale is a key. So the notes in the scale are G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. So all the chords have to be built using some combination of those chords so that they will sound harmonic, if you will, together, create a natural harmony. Now, let me give you an example. The first chord, for instance, it's a G major. Of course, we're in a G major scale. So the first chord is G major. And then the second chord would be an A minor. Now, it's a minor because if it was a major, it would have a C sharp note in it. And that comes from a different key. So that, in a simple nutshell explanation, is why some of the chords are majors and some of them are minors. Now, there's a simple formula that you can simply memorize. The first chord is always a major. The second chord is always a minor. The third chord is a minor. The fourth chord is a major. The fifth chord is a major. We'll talk about the colors of these chords later. The sixth chord is a minor, and that's also known as the relative minor to the scale, but we won't worry about that just yet. And then the seventh chord is a diminished or a half diminished. I'll explain all of this as we get into it. Don't want to get buried in the theory. Now, in the world of jazz, they rarely play anything smaller than a seventh. Not exclusively, of course, but for the most part. And we're going to go ahead and do that because it just makes things more interesting. But what I want to say is these chords are not exclusive to jazz by any means, okay? You can go all the way back to, say, George Harrison's song, Something. Definitely a lot of jazz voicings in there, chromaticism, and all kinds of things. Moving forward to Zeppelin, 10 Years Gone by Jimmy Page, lots of jazz chords. The Rain Song, Stone Temple Pilots, Plush. So these chords get used a lot in rock and other forms of music as well. So right out the gate now, we're going to simply make all of these chords major sevenths or minor sevenths. So the first chord in line will be a G major 7. And you can see that on the tab. Now, the scale or mode, a mode and a scale are the same thing, that fits with that chord is simply the G major scale, which is also known as an Ionian mode. And you can really hear that. It sits really nicely with the chord. Okay? And each chord has an arpeggio that fits the chord as well. And an arpeggio is simply just the notes of the chord played in a scale form, meaning from low to high and back. So the notes in a G major 7 chord are G, B, D, and the 7th, the major 7th, okay? So it's 1st, 3rd, 5th, and 7th. So the arpeggio is going to be made of those 4 notes, low to high, regardless of what order they appear in the chord. Sounds quite lovely. So when playing over that chord, you have the choice of playing the mode or the scale tones, but also and getting all that nice color in there, okay? And of course, when it comes to the scales and the modes, you ultimately want to know them across all 6 strings. And if you want to take a deeper dive into this, I'll put a link in the description box below of my more involved modes lesson called Unlocking the Modes, okay? And that will provide you with the 6th string additions. Now, but for right now, this is really important because playing each chord, its mode that fits it, as well as its arpeggio, really gives you a lot of musical information and opens up the fretboard. And one of the coolest things about this is that it teaches you the shape of each mode on the guitar. And I'll get into that a little bit as we progress through this, okay? Now, moving to the next chord in line, which is an A minor 7, we have what's called a Dorian mode or a Dorian scale. So we're traveling from A to A now, but inside the key of G major, and that's what makes the modes so different. Not too much theory here, hopefully, but just some useful stuff, okay? So A minor 7, and if you want to use your ear, you can travel into the next octave pretty easily. So that's called a Dorian mode, and it fits over the 2nd chord in the key, the A minor 7. So the Dorian mode is the 2nd mode of the key. And then the arpeggio to accompany this chord, it's the same idea now. It's the 1st, the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th. But you notice it's the 7th of the Dorian mode. So we got the 1st, the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th. And that's how the arpeggio starts out, actually. I'll do that nice and slow. Sounds very sweet against the chord. And then, of course, you have the mode. And you can, again, blend those two together. Now, the 3rd chord in the key is B minor 7. You can also play it here if you want to, but we'll play it here just to start expanding out the fretboard a little bit. So for the B minor 7, we have what's called a Phrygian scale or Phrygian mode. And you can hear each one of these sounds really different against the chord because the scale degrees, so to speak, the intervals in the scale start shifting around the key. And that's kind of a over simple explanation, but that's basically what's happening. And so you get these really rich sounds off of each chord that are quite different, okay? And then the arpeggio for that, once again, it's the 1st, 3rd, 5th, and 7th. And again, it's the 7th of the mode of the Phrygian scale. And then the arpeggio off of the 5th string. You can play the same arpeggio off the 6th string as you did on the A minor, by the way. But this is to kind of spread it along the fretboard and across the strings a little bit. So again, the arpeggio is made of the 1st, 3rd, 5th, and 7th. But it's the 1st, 3rd, 5th, and 7th of the Phrygian mode. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 3, 5, 7. And the arpeggio is played like this. Nice and slow. Okay, now the next chord in line is C major 7. Okay, and the mode accompanying that will be the Lydian scale. And you can really hear that sound. And then the arpeggio for the C major 7th chord, we'll have 2 different fingerings for the major 7th. We have the very first one, G, and this would be how you play a major 7th off of the 5th fret. So again, we have a C major 7 chord, and we have the C major 7 arpeggio. you want, using that G major 7th fingering, you can play that up here. Start with the 8th fret on the 1st E string. Okay, so again, it's the Lydian mode and the arpeggio. Now the 5th chord in the scale is a D dominant 7th, major chord of course, but with that dominant 7th in there, capturing that F sharp from the key that we're in. And the mode that accompanies that chord is the D mixolydian. Nice and slow. Okay, and the arpeggio for this is really nice, and you might recognize this from Over the Hills and Far Away by Led Zeppelin. The arpeggio is played like this. That's the arpeggio that you hear at the end of Jimmy Page's solo in Over the Hills and Far Away from the Houses of the Holy album when they play. It's a cool pattern. That's simply a dominant 7th arpeggio. In their case, they're playing an F sharp, and we're playing a D. But it's the same arpeggio. I've been asked about that a lot over the years, and that's exactly what that is. Once again, an F sharp dominant 7th arpeggio. Sounds really serious, doesn't it? And then the next chord in line, the 6th chord, is a minor 7th, again, E minor 7th. And that is the relative minor to G major. Again, trying to not get into too much theory here, even though I know it probably seems like I already have quite a bit. But really, just scratching the surface here. So it's an E minor 7th. And that has a natural minor scale, or what's often referred to as the Aeolian mode. And then the 7th chord in line is F sharp minor 7 flat 5, which sounds really serious, but it's really not. The name is telling you exactly what it is. It's just an F sharp minor 7th, just like the other minor 7ths that we had. But the 5th is flatted to a C natural, because if it stays a C sharp, we're taking it out of the key that we're in, because the G major scale is G, A, B, C natural, not C sharp. So they flat the 5, and it's sometimes referred to as a half diminished chord, but technically it really is a minor 7th flat 5. And the mode that accompanies that chord is the Locrian scale. And the arpeggio is really great. It just sounds great. And then we come full circle back to G major 7. Now, you may be asking yourself, if you're still here, you may be asking yourself, great, Howard, so why do I need to know this and what am I going to do with it? Actually, this is really, really cool stuff, all kidding aside. First of all, knowing these chords, getting into a bit of jazz, even though, as I said earlier, these chords are not exclusive to jazz by any means, not anymore, not for a long time. It's good to know. This is good musical information, but what's really important here is learning the shapes of the modes, because the way you learn the modes theoretically is how they compare to the major scale, and that's what you'll find in a lot of theory books and the way it's taught a lot. I'm not really a big advocate of that. I mean, understanding that and knowing that, the theory, the Lydian scale has a sharp 4 and all that, that's cool. But for you as a guitar player to just get in there and use them in your playing, all you need to know is the shapes. You can get into the theory later on if you want to. Not everybody wants to do that, right? And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. The Beatles didn't know theory, not much anyway, and they didn't read or write music, and they still wrote great songs. But knowing the shape of the modes is really important, and this is a great way to learn them. Knowing that the Ionian, the major scale, is shaped like this, then you know what an Ionian mode is, the shape of it on the guitar. And like I said, you want to know them across all 6 strings. And again, you can check out my Unlocking Modes lesson if you care to do that, or you can find it online, I'm sure, just about anywhere. Or you can follow your ear. And you can find multiple fingerings for any scale or any mode. And then knowing the shape of the Dorian scale, the second scale in the key. And again, following your ear. Again, knowing the shape of the Phrygian scale. The Lydian scale. The Mixolydian scale. The Aeolian mode. The natural minor scale. The Locrian scale, the Locrian mode. So you see what I mean by the shapes. Each one has a specific shape. The Mixolydian. The natural minor. You see, each one has a specific shape, as I keep saying, but that is a great way to learn the modes and memorize them on the fretboard on the guitar. If you want to study the modes theoretically, you can always do that later, but with this, you can put them to use right away, and I mean that sincerely. If you just take the time to learn those 7 fingerings and attach them to the name of the mode, like this is the Locrian scale or this is the Lydian scale or whatever, then you can just call on that shape whenever you need it when you're playing inside a song. And it's a really cool thing to do. And then on top of that, you have the arpeggios for each chord. So let's say you've got a chord progression in this key, okay, traveling from, say, B minor 7 to E minor 7 to A minor 7 to C major 7. First and foremost, if you know what the chords are, which you should know if you're going to play a solo, you know you've got the arpeggios for each of those chords. And if you know the arpeggios really well, you can use them to really play cool melodic lines. You don't necessarily play the whole arpeggio. You might just play a fragment of it. And right away, you've just got access to some pretty cool stuff. Now, let's say we're using those same 4 chords. If you know the modes, then you can really tap into the scale or modal pattern that fits the chord really well. And again, you don't necessarily have to play the whole mode, but you can use it to attach your melodicism, if you will, to the chord. You can hear the difference. It sounds like you're playing the changes. You're playing the song, all right? Now again, this is hardly a deep dive into this. I actually see the modes in 3 different ways, this being the simplest way. Just how do they work in a diatonic progression, a progression where all the chords are in the same key. But you can also use them to play off of the tonal center of a song that has key changes. You can use them independently. The modes in and of themselves, by themselves, have very specific sounds. If I cover this in my Unlocking the Modes lesson, as I mentioned, but I'll give you just a brief example here. If I play each of these modes, these shapes, okay, each of these shapes off of the same tonal center, the same starting note, you really hear what they sound like. For instance, here's the Ionian mode. Here's the Aeolian mode. Here's the Dorian mode. Phrygian. Lydian. Mixolydian. You get the idea. They are very, very distinctive sounding scales because they're not a major scale or a minor scale. They're sort of the scales in between those, if you will. Anyway, enough with the theory stuff today, Howard. Please give us a break. Anyway, I promise the next video will be yet another song. I haven't decided what yet, but I hope to see you guys back on the channel soon. Take care.